Hello, I'm Lydia, and you're listening to Lens from the Fens. Okay, hello. So this is my first full episode for Lens from the Fens. I'm currently sitting in my office at home. The sun is shining outside, and yeah. So in this episode, I'll just be talking about where my love for nature began and how photography became involved alongside. So right at the very beginning, I shall start. Throughout my childhood, there was a lot of animals included within my daily life. We had dogs, cat, fish. We had an aviary for some time with budgerigars and cockatiels. And my sister and I both really enjoyed horse riding, so we were often at the horse riding stables. Most weekends, when we were not at school, we were always down there. So that's really where my interest for animals derived from. Just that I was surrounded by it all, and I was just interested in how these came to be and where they are found around the world, and eventually it grew on to wanting to find out more, just generally everywhere. So I think I had an Australian report I did for primary school or early secondary school, and it was to do with the Great Barrier Reef, and I just remember being fully involved, researching it, finding out about the fish that live there, how large the Great Barrier Reef is, and since then I've just enjoyed researching, find out about them, and then I just go and tell people, any people, family, friends, about these interesting facts that I found, and most people probably won't remember it, but I do, and it's just the fact that I enjoy hearing about all these different tales of how animals have evolved over time, how they hunt, how they raise their young. So yeah, it's something that has stuck with me from the beginning. I also remember from a young age, I really wanted to be a marine biologist, which was probably hard for me to say when I was 5, 6 years old, and also an archaeologist because I was really interested in dinosaurs as well. I could name them all, probably not all of them now, but I remember a lot of names I could remember and recite them to my parents and grandparents and in school as well. Um, so during that time as well, my grandparents played quite a huge role. Um, they had a pond in their garden. I remember one of their first houses. I remember they had a pond in the garden, and they'd show the frogs there and the tadpoles and the birds in the garden. And whenever we were out around the hometown, they'd point out birds to me, and I'd remember. And they also took me to one of my local reserves, which is named Deep in Lakes, part of the Wildlife Trust organisation. And it was on probably one of those first trips I remember when I was with them, and I saw my first wild otter. It appeared on a bank as we were walking through like a wooded area, and it was just sitting there staring, and it was an amazing moment. It was there for a good probably about 10 seconds or so, and my grandparents and I were just looking at it, and it looked back at us, and then it just slipped back into the water and carried on. So I've been really. It's just nice to know that I have a lot of memories from my childhood where I've had encounters with wildlife from such a young age. So I'm really grateful for that, and I'm also really grateful that it's carried on into my adulthood as well, that I can just go out and I can be fascinated from seeing a flock of house sparrows in the garden, or seeing a buzzard like soaring up in the sky really far. I'll just pick out things like that, whereas I think a lot of people sort of miss that. But it's just nice to know that I can pick it out and I can be happy and content with seeing it, whereas a lot of other people might not. So back to, this is probably around secondary school now. My main work experience, I actually went to Paynton Zoo in Devon for 3 weeks, and my grandparents again, they offered to take me there in their caravan. So I stayed with them in their caravan on a caravan park not so far away from where the zoo was, and I'm really grateful for that. I remember when I was there, I was just really interested in wanting to take care of animals, know more about exotic species. I remember I groomed one of the zebras there. I helped feed the giraffes while it was getting a medical check done. I stroked a tapir, which is probably one of my most favourite mammals outside of the UK. They're just an intriguing animal, and I remember there's a photo of me tickling them on the tummy, and then they just laid down afterwards, and it was just an amazing experience. And I didn't fully obviously go into zoology or anything, but it was just nice that my interest in all sorts of animals stemmed from that. And again, it's stuck with me since, and evolved into what I'm doing today. So wildlife documentaries, I watched an awful lot of those. Again, I was probably around 6 years old when the Blue Planet series must have come out, and Life on Earth, all the David Attenborough things pretty much I remember watching. My mum and my sister didn't enjoy watching them. They didn't enjoy seeing the lions hunt the zebras and the wildebeest. But I knew that it was part of life, so I enjoyed just seeing how they hunted, how they worked as a group. And I think one of my favourites from the Blue Planet series was the orcas off, I think it was Argentina coast, and they were hunting sea lions there. And I just remember the immense power that they had, and I was just in awe at how these creatures could just lunge themselves up on the beach and take out a young sea lion pup, or even a adolescent one if they could. So I just always enjoyed watching things like that. And I remember my grandparents told me that they actually bought the video DVD of Blue Planet, and they said that the cashier asked them who it was for, and when they said, oh, it's our granddaughter who's 6 years old, apparently they were very shocked at my age. But it's just what I was interested in, and again, just seeing how animals lived in their own world and how they hunted, how they courted, like the birds of paradise. I remember watching them as well, and just being in awe, pretty much. So from documentaries, as I obviously got older, I was able to do more of my own things outside of school and work. So I've been lucky enough to have a lot of animal encounters alongside sanctuaries and rescue shelters nearby. So I did bird of prey experiences. I did whale watching a couple of times now, but the first time was in Tenerife. Oh gosh, I must have been 13, 14 years old. I think I was early teens. And my mum, my sister and I went, and we went on a boat out, and we saw dolphins in the distance. I think they were the common dolphin. They were near like a fishing farm. And then as we got further out, there was a call for a pod of pilot whales, and obviously I knew of them and very excited at the time. And then it wasn't until we got a bit closer, and the pod was just, it must have been about 15, 20 individuals, and they just all hung around the boat. And then one huge male came up for air right alongside the boat and where I was standing, so I got a face full of breath and snot from the pilot whale. And I just remember standing looking around. I was like, oh my gosh, did that really happen? Just looking back on it now, it was an amazing experience, which I must have forgotten about for some time. But looking back on things where I was able to see wildlife as it was from an early age and just being fascinated by it. So again, just having the opportunity to see animals like that up close, it's just really gratifying. So my first real introduction to wildlife photography actually came from primary school, and we had a photographer he did the school photos, where we had our own school photos taken, and then the year groups and so on. And his name's Nick Williams, and he also did presentations of his own wildlife work. So in his presentation, he just showed all the images he'd taken from different places around the world that, again, heard of but never been to. And there was even things from local. He had like photos of young barn owlets in the barn, and then it would be onto things like pelicans from Florida. And I remember he asked the question, "Oh, what is this animal?" And it was a picture of an echidna, and it was I was the only person who put my hand up and got it right, because a lot of people thought it was a hedgehog, but I got it right with the echidna, and I was allowed one of his printed photos for free. And so that's like my earliest recollection of when I first encountered wildlife photography, and for it to be someone who lives local, it was really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I still enjoy his work today. And he also features later on when I get older, but I'll get to that shortly. So leading into the proper introduction of photography, I have always had a creative side. I always enjoyed painting, drawing, anything where I could just get creative. It came again from an early age all the way up to when I started college. So when I went to New College, Stamford, I studied a level 3 art and design course, and within that, as well as all the creative arts design side, photography was actually part of the learning curriculum. So the college has access to a dark room. It was on one of the like basement floors, and so from there we learned about the introduction of photography, how it first came around, and how film was incorporated, how it was used, what effects you could get from it, and eventually obviously learned about how the digital age came around. And unfortunately that film has declined in the amount it's used, but from in that course I learned how to use film. I was introduced to composition work, exposures, rule of thirds, so that was my first initial learning of photography. So after completing my art and design course, I wanted to stick to the photography side, and I moved on to a foundation degree in creative and editorial photography. So this, again, there was still film involved. I remember us using Hasselblads in the studio for portrait work, but a lot of the other time it was where we had either cameras rented from the college, or if we had our own, we could use it to do our projects with. So I tried to include animals as much as I could in my projects, and all the way through to my final major project, I wanted to again include animals, but I did a link between how man has grown accustomed to using animals in daily life, how they're used in today's world, really. So some of the people and animals I photographed include Great Dane Adoption Society. So it was a rescue Great Dane, and I photographed her with my dad. I can't remember the dog's name. And then I also went to a farmer who owned Lincoln cattle, which is really good. I've remained friends with the farmer since. And there was also a Shire horse owner who bred them and reared them for shows. And then probably one of my favourites was going to a charity organisation near home, which is the Exotic Pet Refuge, where they take in animals that were originally pets or retired from circuses and zoos. And the owner, Pam, she does an amazing job looking after them, and there's all sorts of volunteers there. So some of the photographs there were of the keepers with some of the animals that they looked after. One being, it was like a wolf hybrid. I think his name was Arrow, and yeah, just it did come out as a really good project. I learned a lot from the history of how man and animal work together, and how they're used in daily life as opposed to just having them as a pet. But because it was like a creative and editorial, the wildlife side didn't really fit in, because it wasn't. I struggled to create a project out of that, just to say, oh, I'm going to go photograph wildlife. It sort of had to have a story behind it. It had to have a journey, and at the time I couldn't really think of how I could incorporate it. So that was where the Man and Beast project came around, and it was a success. My lecturer at the time really enjoyed it, and towards the end of the year. That was where we had our own show in Camden. We had our own gallery rented out, and we had an open evening. We had our favourite prints on the show. So yeah, it was just really good at the time, but it was just a little bit disappointing that I couldn't have incorporated wildlife photography within that course. So because of that, I opted to do or try and do wildlife photography outside of my study time. And this is where I actually go back to Nick Williams, who did the presentations at my primary school. It was a few summers ago now, and I had the opportunity, I got in touch with him, and he said that he was doing some scopes around the Batterston and Deeping area just to see what wildlife was there to shoot. At this time I was very much beginner in terms of my knowledge of camera usage. So I had a second-hand Canon 400D, and that was literally all I had. I stuck to, at the time I was just using automatic settings, but Nick actually told me certain manual settings that I could use just to learn more about the camera as opposed to just pointing and shooting. And he set me up in a natural hide. This is one of my first outings with him a few summers ago now, but he had a natural hide where it was reeds and branches that were all sort of curving over each other, and a little area for where he originally sat. So I sat in there, and he said, "Oh, there's a nest in front of you for reed warblers," and he said just to sit and watch. As long as your camera's set up, I'll leave you to it. I'll go elsewhere. So I was left in the hide. I can't even remember how long it was now. Probably about a good 45 minutes. And yeah, I was just watching on this nest, and there were chicks in it. There were, I think, two or three chicks, and quite a few times the parents came back with food, probably about every 10 minutes or so. So I was either there just with the chicks while they were sleeping, and then as soon as the parents came back, they would all be happy squawking with their necks stretched out and their mouths wide open. And I got some surprisingly good photos from that, despite not really having much knowledge in doing wildlife photography on my own. Yeah, I think it must have been about 2012, around that time, and still being quite young, I found myself not to be the most patient of people. I would always want to know what I was up to, what we were doing today, the next day, and the day after. So I wasn't necessarily patient in terms of wanting to know what was happening and what I needed to do. But for that experience, I learned how to be patient, how to be quiet, how to listen, how to know when something's coming. So that was my first sort of realisation that wildlife photography is a lot to do with patience. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. And since then, I've had other hide encounters with Nick. Ones to do with Great Crested Grebe, and I think a couple of summers ago, a few summers, I was up in a really tall hide. Oh gosh, it must have been about 10 feet off the ground, up like a builder's ladder. And then it was the camouflage tent on top of it, and it was a very hot day, I remember. And again, I was left in there good hour or so, and there was a young green woodpecker chick in the trunk of this tree, and it hadn't left yet, so it was still calling out for food. It was very vocal, and the parents, again, they would come back with food every now and again for it. Again, some really nice images from that. Again, learning how to be patient despite it being stiflingly hot. And just getting to know the surroundings, listening out for calls, timing things. So I learned a lot from him, and I'm grateful for that. And yeah, he was just a great introduction to actually being outdoors and learning as you're there. I'm really grateful for that. From studying, I managed to get into the photography industry pretty much straight away from graduating. So I have been a full-time product photographer for it must be about 6 years now. I first started working with Kurt Geiger. I was about 4 years, and then I found another product company closer to home. Again, it was to do with fashion wear, homeware, and I also did modelling work as well. And that was till towards the end of 2019. And then now I'm still a product photographer for a crafting company, again, not far from where I live. So from my studies, I've actually been really lucky to be able to go from study straight into the photography industry. But I still have the time to do my wildlife work, which I'm really grateful for, because I do enjoy my job, um, but the wildlife side of it, I've been grateful that I'm able to do it in my own time. So I have done a lot of other photo trips, and now that I'm older, I'm a bit more independent, and since I got my car, I've really enjoyed being able to just drive out either around the fens, or organising day trips with other photographers, which I'm happy to go into detail for another future episode. But more often than not, I'm just happy to go in my own time to a local spot on my own, and going with what I'd learned over the past decade or so. Yeah, just going out on my own and seeing what's there. So I'll quickly go through what I currently own in terms of gear, my photography gear. I don't have an awful lot, but I think it's more because I'm comfortable with the lenses and the bodies that I already have, and they produce great enough quality photos anyway. So unless one day I decide to up the camera body or get more multiple lenses, then that time will probably come. But in terms of it, I just wanted to get the basics that I needed, and they've all worked really well. So my camera body is a Canon 6D, which I brought off another photographer friend of mine, and I also own a 100 to 400 Canon lens, a 75 to 300 Sigma. Both of those are really good. They're just good all round, really. But the 100 to 400 is one I use pretty much all the time. It just has a really good focal range, and the aperture, I think it must be a f4. It's quite an old lens, but it still works great, and the quality is really good. And same with the 75 to 300 Sigma. I used it on the trip to Edale a few years ago, last year. And yeah, that was good for getting landscape shots and the birds and the wildlife that are around there. I do have a tripod, obviously, especially if I'm in an area for a considerable amount of time, and I obviously can't hold up the 100 to 400 lens for very long. So tripod's good for that. But I found myself using my monopod a lot more, just because the ease of carrying it around, it's not as heavy as the tripod, and I could just fit it to the lens, especially if I'm photographing a moving subject, and it's great for panning. I could just turn it on the spot as it's on the leg, and yeah, it works well. And again, it just gets to see the weight off my arm, like trying to hold the lens up while trying to follow something in a straight line. I also have a fixed 50mm Canon lens. Again, great for landscapes, but that's pretty much all I use it for, because I've got bigger lenses to use anyway. Multiple batteries, obviously. I think that's with any photographer. As long as you've got more batteries, then the better. Same with SD cards. I'll probably have about 3 or 4 SD cards that range from a 16 gig to 32 gig. Because the worst thing is only having one SD card, going out somewhere and thinking, oh no, I left it in the laptop, or I left it in the card reader. So it's always worth having multiples of them, again, for any form of photography. I do have a flash gun. I think it's one of the Yonguno. I can't remember. One of those flash guns. But I don't really use it for my wildlife. I much prefer using the natural light. Just it's more natural then, and I think flashes for me are just a bit too artificial. So I do have it, again, just for just the sake of having it there. One of my other lenses I actually have, my long lens is a 150 to 600 Sigma. Obviously it's a lot better range to the 100 to 400, but I struggle having both of the large lenses with me because I'm only just over 5'2", and having a lot of gear on me for a long amount of time, it does put strain on my back. So I often just take the 100 to 400 just because the range suits me, but I do obviously have it there as a backup. Again, if I'm staying somewhere for quite some time, and then at least I could take it with me and I know it's there in case I want to use it. But again, more often it's the 100 400 that I go for. So that is, I think that's pretty much what I've got to say about where it all began. If you want to see any of my work, so the name of my wildlife photography work is Pinfold Photographic. I can be found across quite a number of social media platforms. Just simply search for Pinfold Photographic on Instagram, Facebook, and I do have a Twitter account, but I'm not very much active on there. It's more my Facebook and my Instagram where I post more of my images. But if you want to see a whole range of my work rather than scrolling through my profile, I do have my own website, which is www.pinfold-photographic.co.uk. So yeah, all of my work can be found on there across the years. I've got a portfolio containing folders for birds, landscapes, mammals and reptiles. I do have a couple of special folders where they're to do with like my day trips. So I've got one for the deer rutting season, which was a couple of years ago now. That was at Richmond Park. Bempton Cliffs, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That was last summer that I went to see all the seabirds there. And also a workshop from the Big Cat Sanctuary, which I did again last year. It's for a really good cause, and it just gives the opportunity to get up close with the big cats that they have there. So yeah, you can find again my work on my website or the social media platforms with the name Pinfold Photographic. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode. I will be hopefully posting one once a week, and it will just be a variety of things that I can provide for you, other first encounters and tips and advice on doing wildlife photography. But thank you for listening. I hope this has been enjoyable for you as it has for me, going back to where it all began and where I've got to now. So thank you for listening, stay safe, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. My podcast cover shows my own image created using Canva. The theme music is provided by Purple Planet Music. Check out their royalty-free music at purple-planet.com.